2.5 million barrels of fuel per day. That is the volume that stopped flowing to the American East Coast on May 7, 2021. In a single decisive action, Colonial Pipeline proactively shut down its entire 8,850-kilometer operational network, halting the delivery of gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel to approximately 50 million consumers. This was not a mechanical failure or a natural disaster. Within hours, the Federal Bureau of Investigation confirmed the cause: a ransomware attack perpetrated by a cybercriminal organization known as DarkSide. The initial phase of the incident response was defined by disorientation. A regional emergency was declared across 18 states to manage the immediate supply shock. News reports focused on rising gas prices and lines at the pump, treating the event as a logistics crisis. But for cybersecurity analysts, the critical question was not about the economic disruption, it was about the integrity of the perimeter. The core problem was an intelligence failure. A hostile actor had gained administrative access to the corporate network of the nation's most vital fuel artery. The system was paralyzed. But the paralysis of the network was only the first symptom. To grasp the true nature of this failure, one must first comprehend the sheer scale of the asset that had just been compromised. The Colonial Pipeline is more than just 8,850 kilometers of steel pipe. It is a circulatory system for the American economy, a complex fusion of physical infrastructure and digital command. From its origin points on the Gulf Coast, it transports approximately 45% of the East Coast supply of gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel, servicing industries and consumers across 18 states. This is the definition of critical national infrastructure. To manage this immense logistical task, the system operates on two distinct digital planes. The first is the operational technology, or OT network. This is the industrial control system, a highly secured, isolated environment that directly monitors and manipulates the physical pipeline, valve pressure, flow rates, and safety sensors. The second is the information technology, or IT network. This is the corporate environment, handling business functions like billing, email, and employee records. In theory, a robust air gap or a series of firewalls should separate these two domains completely, protecting the physical asset from corporate network threats. This critical artery was protected by layers of security designed to defend its industrial controls. The attackers, however, did not need to launch a direct assault on the hardened OT network. They found a much simpler way in. The point of entry was not a sophisticated zero-day exploit or a brute force assault on the pipeline's industrial controls. It was a single, compromised password. Forensic analysis confirmed that attackers gained their initial foothold by authenticating to a virtual private network, or VPN, appliance on the corporate IT network. This VPN account, which was no longer in active use, allowed remote access, but was not protected by the company's multi-factor authentication, or MFA, systems. A single valid credential, likely discovered on the dark web from a previous, unrelated breach, was the only key required to unlock the perimeter. Once inside, the threat actors, identified by the FBI as affiliates of the DarkSide ransomware as a service platform, began the next phase of the attack: lateral movement. They moved methodically across the IT network, escalating privileges and mapping the digital terrain to identify high-value systems. This operational pattern, gaining initial access via remote services and then expanding control internally, was later detailed in a joint advisory from CISA and the FBI. Before triggering the encryption routine, the attackers exfiltrated nearly 100 gigabytes of sensitive corporate data. Their objective was not sabotage, but extortion. With the data secured, their next step was to deploy the payload that would paralyze the company. With nearly 100 gigabytes of corporate data exfiltrated, the DarkSide operators initiated the final phase of their attack. The ransomware payload was deployed, silently propagating across the IT network and encrypting files on server after server. The corporate infrastructure was now held hostage. In response, Colonial Pipeline's leadership made a decisive, unprecedented call: a complete proactive shutdown of the 8,850-kilometer operational pipeline. This was not because the industrial controls were compromised, but to prevent the malware from potentially crossing the IT-OT divide and causing a catastrophic physical event. The nation's fuel artery was severed by its own operators as a defensive measure. Soon after, the ransom note appeared on locked computer screens. It was a clear, transactional demand for millions of dollars in cryptocurrency in exchange for a decryption tool. The executive team was now trapped in a strategic dilemma, a textbook case of modern targeted extortion. Refusing to pay meant accepting a prolonged, potentially indefinite shutdown, with immense economic and political consequences. Paying meant funding a criminal enterprise and trusting that the decryption key provided would actually work. The decision was made. The ransom would be paid. But while the transfer of cryptocurrency could be executed in minutes, the damage to the network was far from over. The digital paralysis of Colonial's IT network now cascaded into the physical world. With 45% of the East Coast's fuel supply offline, the shutdown triggered widespread panic buying and immediate market disruption. Gas prices surged as supply chains seized. In response, a whole-of-government effort was activated, mobilizing the Department of Energy, the Department of Transportation, and CISA to manage the fallout. A regional emergency was declared across 18 states, granting regulatory relief to allow fuel transport by road and authorizing overweight loads on interstate highways. It was a logistical mobilization on a national scale, all orchestrated to mitigate the consequences of a single compromised password. The incident drew immediate comparisons to the SolarWinds and Microsoft Exchange breaches, exposing a pattern of systemic risk to the nation's most critical sectors. Although the FBI successfully traced and recovered $2.3 million of the ransom payment, the event had already crossed a critical threshold. While Colonial Pipeline began the slow process of restarting operations, achieving a full restoration by May 13, the tangible impact, from closed gas stations to federal intervention, demonstrated that a private company's cybersecurity failure could constitute a national security crisis. The fuel eventually began to flow again, and the lines at the pump dissipated. But for security officials, the operational recovery was secondary. The strategic vulnerability it exposed was now the primary concern. The Colonial Pipeline incident didn't just expose a vulnerability. It forced a reckoning. The boundary between information technology and operational technology is no longer a firewall. It's a battleground. The answer isn't exotic. It's a disciplined return to fundamentals. Universal multi-factor authentication. Consistent patching. Eliminating single points of failure, like that legacy VPN account that let DarkSide walk right in. These aren't best practices anymore. They're the non-negotiable cost of operating critical infrastructure in a hostile digital environment. This hardening is essential because the threat has specialized. Security researchers now track OT-focused ransomware groups like Sylvanite and Pyroxene, whose entire business model targets industrial operations. In the last year alone, attacks against the industrial sector increased by 49%, with manufacturing the most frequent target. Across the globe, at least 119 distinct ransomware operations have affected over 3,300 industrial organizations. The adversary is no longer opportunistic. They're running a business, and business is booming. This new reality demands a framework of proactive defense. Assume breach. Aggressively segment networks. Build brick walls, not screen doors, so an intrusion into corporate IT can never threaten physical OT systems. Treat every remote access point as critical infrastructure in its own right, subject to the most stringent security protocols. The goal: move from a posture of fearful reaction to one of informed resilience. Before we conclude, this analysis is educational only and does not provide exploit instructions. The blueprints for both attack and defense are now clear. The only remaining variable is execution. Is your organization prepared? Or will it learn this lesson the way Colonial did? The hard way.